Let me welcome you to the joint event of the HIPON project. And while we are waiting for the Dean of the School of Health Science, Professor Patsouris, to address his salutation, I think we should better begin so that the program goes well. And here is my introductory lecture. So I'll try to describe the principles of our project and show you what we have achieved, how well we have prepared our platform, and in the other sessions we're going to discuss further amendments which need to be made, taking into account the results of the testing period which terminates at the end of this month. So this is the title of our project, HIPON, and it's a project co-financed by the Education, Audiovisual and Culture Executive Agency of the European Union, and its main aim, its main purpose is to bridge theory and practice in our field in pathology. For those who are not familiar with medical specialties, pathology is a specialty which examines tissues from all parts of the body, both before an operation, that's the biopsy level, and after the operation, so as to determine all those crucial parameters to define the patient's therapy and prognosis. So, taking into account that all textbooks, not all, but nearly all, follow a rather academic way of presenting the educational material, meaning having separate entities and describing thoroughly and quite analytically their features, either the symptoms of the patient, macroscopic feature, microscopic features, and treatment. We thought that this is quite distant from what a pathologist does in his everyday practice, where he has a piece of tissue, he knows some clinical information, but it's up to him to decide, to judge from what he sees the significance of the lesions and define the correct diagnosis. So in our project, we just try to bridge theory and practice, everyday practice, so that a medical student or a resident in pathology or even an experienced pathologist becomes familiar with the correct way of making a diagnosis. These are the main partners of the project. The head partner is the University of Athens. I work at the first department of pathology from the medical faculty of the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens, and the other centers, pathology centers, with which I have the honor to collaborate, is the Department of Pathology of the University of Zagreb under Professor Sven Seifert, and the Radboud University Nijmegen Medical Center under Professor Van Krikken. These are the partners having to do the work in pathology, the medical work. However, in order that the whole platform was materialized, we needed some experts, both in the concept of education, and so we have the pleasure to collaborate with Dr. Vrasidas, who is a professor of educational sciences at the University of Nicosia and runs a company dealing with many educational projects. He was the one who conceptualized the whole idea and developed a template to which we had to comply and fit all our educational material to it, so that the ICT experts from Cyrillus and Methodius University in Skopje, with Professor Goce Armensky ahead, took all this material and developed the platform we are going to see. So we'll say just a few words on the theory behind what we did. Mainly, it's something that most of us have been following by instinct all these years practicing as teachers. However, having to justify what we did, I had to look up at the literature and picked many data from the field of educational sciences, That means how do students or residents learn. So, of course, learning in not just passing exams with excellent marks, but you should have useful skills so that you are quite competent as a professional. And skills most often are developed unconsciously. That means from your environment. And what can this environment be? It can be either the physical presence of a teacher, which in my opinion is irreplaceable, but it can also be an ICT environment, platform through e-learning activities where it has the possibility to pass all this experience to the patient, so to the student. So taking advantage or the experience we have been in practicing pathology, we put all this data on a platform, always thinking through an interactive way so that the young learner attracts his interest to this and learns. So this is in the relevant literature called a catalyst, and if you need useful skills, creating a catalyst is a must. So this part of learning should be officially implemented in academic institutions as a complement to the traditional formal way of academic learning. So all this is trying to restore interest in learning, and students should learn from experience. That means that from the modern concept of view, students should take themselves responsibility for their own education. What students study must have a meaning for their professional life, and this knowledge must be personally relevant to the students. So in our project dealing with everyday cases, we managed to adapt this form to everyday practice in pathology. So we tried to help students learn how to use all these electronic resources and think critically and solve problems like they are going to do in their professional life later. Now, the active involvement of the learner increases the learning value, meaning that if we restrict our teaching to traditional lectures, this is not so creative for the students, because I can go on with my lecture, for example, and your participation, your active participation is not necessary to complete the whole procedure. So if somebody is not personally involved in the learning process, it's very difficult to acquire experience. So these are some advantages of active learning compared to passive learning. And all our platform was built in such an interactive way so as to promote active learning and to make the users think critically, solve problems, and make judgments. All this, of course, is not our innovative idea. Several personalities of the past have made this concept of education, and as far as Greek philosophers are concerned, here is what Aristotle said: for the things we have to learn before we can do them, we learn by doing them. So the tutor in modern education is not so much an information provider as a facilitator for the student to learn. So what we did was to create an online environment simulating the actual daily pathology practice. And this was, we hoped that this would be an intelligence catalyst for medical students and residents, so that through these activities such as digitalized studies, case-based studies, and simulation of decisions a pathologist is called to make in his everyday practice, they come very close to being themselves in a department of pathology. If we implement experiential learning strictly, we should have all our students in our departments on a daily basis and participate in the whole diagnostic procedures. That being not possible, we tried to simulate this environment through the educational platform. And these are the goals we had, that students should deepen their knowledge through repeatedly acting and then reflecting. That means reflection requires a sort of communication, because when you reflect, you want to talk with your colleague. So, apart from the educational part of the platform, there is a social media part where all users can communicate and describe their opinions and what they reflect after using the platform. And all this aims at developing skills through practice and reflection. So, let's have a look at how the parts of our platform help the users. So, what we want to do is to transmit the competencies they need for real-world professional success. So, experiential learning motivates students because they see the relevance of the experience they are confronted to, and also it creates self-directed learners. This is compatible with the role of the teacher as a facilitator of learning. This is the academic way of the concept of this sort of learning developed by Kolb, and this is the cycle, Kolb cycle. This is concrete experience engaging directly in authentic situation. Authentic situations means what you see in everyday practice. So, the different parts of our platform, of course, have as an aim to transmit knowledge. That means the formal way of learning is not neglected in our platform. However, this way is not the predominant one. And it's simply why, because if somebody wants just learning, he can Google anything he wants and get lots and lots of information. So there is no use trying to make just another textbook on the internet. So formal learning is presented in theoretical parts, but only the essential parts of this learning, not details. Now, activity, of course, is what is close to real-world setting, and this is more than well, I hope, represented in the platform by HIPON case presentations, the digitalized slides in which the student can navigate himself through the slide and recognize lesions, and most importantly perhaps from decisions he is asked to make during the diagnostic procedure. And all this leads to reflection, which can be developed through HIPON social page, the Histo book. Now, students can learn either from natural consequence, mistakes, and successes. So it is some sort of a game developed, and the case presentations are developed in such a way so that the student has to pick the correct answer among other answers and see whether he is right, and then get a full explanation why he was right, and in case he is wrong, he can go back and repeat the exercise, or he can go to the differential diagnosis part and see why all the wrong answers are wrong in the context of a particular case. And furthermore, through these facilities, HIPON Histo book, the online game, and case presentation, we said as before that the student has to make decisions for the diagnosis. All this leads to an authentic type of situation that the student is confronted with, and in this way students communicate between them and they consolidate what they have learned. This is also done by the HIPON Histo book page. So from a theoretical part, we see that our platform is based on real cases and tries to make a change between the relationship of the student and the teacher, and it tries to make teachers be as reflective practitioners. That means having to record their experience on an electronic platform. So in our project, all teachers involved, all pathologists and cytopathologists who have contributed to the content, had to construct some meaningful educational experiences and lead students to real-life problems. So all knowledge is no longer abstract and becomes very, very tangible. So knowledge becomes alive, and this is the practical application of knowledge. So all this tries to connect students with real world. Here is some data of the literature dealing with this sort of educational methodology. And of course, there is a comparison between experiential learning and academic learning. Academic learning is not at all uneducative from the beginning. It's very useful because it helps students to organize what they have learned from the real life experiences. That means you cannot learn only by instinct and by experience. You need to organize your knowledge and become some sort of a very put all knowledge in a correct order. And of course this is achieved only through academic formal learning. So apart from the case studies, which is the practical part and which is the main part of HIPON, there are many other activities on the platform very close to formal learning, such as original links with many images taken from my experience as a teacher at the university for about 18 years now, as well as by other more experienced colleagues who have made some tutorials based on images, but also reflecting basic theory in them. So here is a comparative assessment between conventional learning and experiential learning. Of course, the differences can be highlighted. For example, experiential learning is individually directed and has all these sorts of things, games, exercises, really doing the thing. On the other hand, conventional training is more theoretical, is based on exams, and it explains and transfers knowledge and hopefully skills. So the traditional role teacher is not the predominant. However, I think it is more than well represented in our platform, because a targeted body of basic information is apparent, and of course many resources are proposed to the users, and all this is assessed by specific tests which try to test the user's familiarization with the educational subject. So all this was done through our love of learning, trying to inspire users and transmit our interest and our eagerness to learn, and all this tries to share a positive world view. This is the role of teachers as co-learners and facilitators in learning, and this is inevitable because the amount of data in medicine has increased enormously the past years, so a tutor cannot know anything. So he needs somebody with a younger brain than his to try and look what's all the modern data and transmit it to him. So from this process of interactivity between teacher and student, the teacher has also to learn quite a lot. All this tries to experience the light of knowledge and Now, as we'll pass to our platform, we pose a question: why should one teach? A simple answer would be that you teach only if you want to make a difference. And as far as we are concerned, we tried to make a difference, and I believe that at some extent we have achieved that by making users decide themselves, be personally involved in the learning and practical problem-based experience, learning to apply modern technology in everyday practice, and simulate experience that make them decide what they want to do. And this simulation is probably the most innovative part of our platform. So, to begin, this is our web portal, and we can see that there you can find some information for the project, all the involved partners, primary partners, principal partners, and secondary partners, some educational material which may serve as an introduction, and then, of course, you can have access to the e-platform by using appropriate entering data till the end of the year, well, when the platform will be finalized, and then it will be free for use for all users. And there's also a storage platform where all educational material has been stored and according to accepted templates which were developed by Dr. Vrasidas, and this made Professor Armensky's work much more easy to implement on the e-platform. So this is the basic structure of general pathology and systemic pathology chapters. We made an attempt to develop all chapters of general, of basic pathology and systemic pathology, and indeed we succeeded in having all chapters, all parts of the human body with the basic lesions. However, some of them are inevitably more well developed and others are less well developed. However, as a perspective, now that the template has been well consolidated, it is possible to expand the platform and have a real systemic and basic pathology facility. So let's start the module A, which is the basic pathology part of the platform, and this part was developed by Professor Van Krieken and is based on virtual slides, meaning that the cases are briefly presented with some basic clinical data, and then the user has at his disposal the whole slide, not under a microscope, but on the screen of his PC, so he can navigate himself throughout all magnitudes, starting always, as always in pathology, from low magnifications and passing to high magnifications. And of course, he needs help to do that, and all this help is provided by proper assignments which the student can open, and always in comparison with normal histology, because our basic concept is to differentiate the normal from the abnormal, the lesional. So this is how the whole part of general pathology is built, and of course there are some links either from web sources and as well as from original links from our own educational material we have been using in our departments in the context of what I previously called traditional teaching. So this is one case. Here are some images with which most of the students attending the event are already familiar when they passed from the Department of Pathology, and all these images have been properly analyzed to the users. So I just put this facility to say that the conventional way is also represented in our platform. And here is the social page where the users can communicate with each other. And now we'll pass to the 31 chapters of systemic pathology. And now we are going to see how all these principles that I've previously mentioned are materialized in the platform. We choose the prostate gland chapter, and of course we have the objectives. That means that when a user passes through this whole chapter, what is our aim to transmit to him? Here is the beginning. This particular chapter was developed by me and Professor Pavlakis. So you can see here that there is some basic knowledge with images, which of course can be enlarged so that the user has better morphology detail. And of course there are some glossary terms to which the user can refer, and these lead to the relevant list at the end of the chapter, and as well as some proposed references for the user who wants further study. Here are the original links which reflect our own experience as traditional teachers of pathology, and all this is aims to make the user deepen his knowledge. Here is one link dealing with the small gland pattern of in prostate pathology. All these images are fully and very much in detailed analyzed personally by me, perhaps too analytically, but that's my way. I can not do anything less. And here is the same, a similar link about the large gland pattern in prostate pathology. And of course here is a full text. It would not be a good idea to insert so much text within the main content of the platform, because as the experts in educational sciences have noticed, all users would be discouraged because they have had enough information from textbooks and all other sources of traditional learning. So in this way, these analytical texts are kept only for those who are willing to study them and get further details. Then comes a video tutorial which deals with one slide that is either available as a virtual slide later on or represents one of the cases of the chapter. So this is the video tutorial. It lasts about 4 to 5 minutes, and I describe all the pathology and histology that is on the slide, and this specific video is on a conventional type of acinar cell adenocarcinoma of the prostate. And after the user has listened and seen the video, he has the virtual slide at his disposal. Virtual slides in systemic pathology have been developed both by Professor Van Krieken in his department at Nijmegen University Medical Center, and by Professor Zijfert and Dr. Brzik from Zagreb University. They need, of course, some technology to open to the users, and Professor Armensky has seen to provide all relevant information on what facilities the computer must have to open the virtual slides. This is in the instructions he has prepared for the users. As you can see, the resolution is quite high and quite clear, so that the user can put in parallel the features of malignant prostate glands by comparison to entrapped normal glands, in which you can see how well the basal cell layers is preserved. And then comes the more interactive part of the platform with the cases. The cases are presented with basic clinical information as in our everyday practice, and of course we always start our cases from low magnification, as we always tell young pathologists that they should work predominantly on low magnification so as to define the architecture, the whole architecture of the tissue. Then we stress some staining differences which are easy for everybody to notice on the slide, and try to connect these staining differences, meaning other areas are more darkly stained, others are more weakly stained. We try to connect these differences with the different patterns of prostate gland pathology. So this is how the case is presented, and of course each of the successive images has specific questions or legends. Those cases which are more easy are presented with questions, because we want to show to the user what he wants to see. Other cases with which the user is not so familiar with, some rare cases from systems that are not a major component of a pathology laboratory, are presented by descriptive legends. So with this succession of images, we try for the user to focus on the most essential part for his diagnosis and disregard some details which are not important to him. And this is the most difficult part for the teacher, because he has to select the correct question so that the user sees what the teacher wants him to see. And after morphology, there are the facilities of additional techniques which must be used wisely and only when there is a relevant indication. As far as the present case is concerned, there are some selections of immunochemical markers which are proposed to the user. However, only one or two of them are really relevant for the diagnosis. So in this way, the user has to pick the correct markers to make the diagnosis, and in case he selects the correct markers, he gets the relevant immunohistochemical stain images. And of course, he gets some specific comments on the immunoreactivity of its marker and how he has to evaluate this immunoreactivity in order to reach the correct diagnosis. From all markers proposed, 2 are of some importance and not always helpful. However, it's wise that the user selects them. And here are some tips on how to evaluate immunohistochemical staining, which is always assessed by comparison to morphology and never on its own. And here are the irrelevant markers which are of no use in the diagnosis. So after this procedure, the user has to pick one of 4 alternative diagnoses, and if he gets it right, he gets a full explanation and some tips what he should take care of when he deals with this sort of biopsy, and he gets a full explanation with all those images which have been previously presented to him, this time with many arrows and a text fully describing all the images and what they show, always with regard to the correct diagnosis. And after this, there is a test for the user, always an image-based test, from which the user can see how well he has consolidated all that he has learned. And of course, he gets the explanation of the answers, the image-based questions. And in the similar context, we can just go through another chapter of the platform dealing on kidney tumors, objectives again, glossary terms, conventional static images with descriptions, links, glossary terms, resources, and web links Some of them change very, very quickly, but the majority of them, I'm sure, remains active at the learner's disposal. And again, we have the instructional video, here presenting a typical case of clear cell renal cell carcinoma, and the relevant virtual slide. This specific one was developed in Professor Van Kreuken's lab, where you can see some very useful characteristics for the diagnosis of a conventional clear cell. And then it's time for decision. If we make the wrong diagnosis, that's not so bad, because we learn not only from our correct choices, but we learn from our wrong choices as well. And so we have the possibility to go back to the images and do the test again. Here we got the correct one, and now we have the full explanation why this is a clear cell papillary renal cell carcinoma and not the other proposed answers. This is the differential diagnosis part, in which all wrong answers are justified why they are wrong. And again, we have the test. You see, if somebody is pays enough attention, he can find all answers to the image-based questions through the reading of the differential diagnosis part. Here is another question and a score. This is the impact of our project, which has been quite well received, as is shown by the 5 full papers that have been published, the 2 invited speeches which were done in the European Congresses of Pathology, and 7 congresses in which our parts of our platform were presented as posters. And interestingly, in 2 of these congresses, these posters were selected by the scientific committees of the congresses for a special discussion and a special presentation. And one of them was the 30th Congress of International Academy of Pathology in Bangkok last year, and the other was a very recent Congress of medical students in Berlin, in which our poster was selected by the scientific committee among the 20% of the submitted abstracts for a second presentation and discussion before a professor's committee. The perspectives are the expansion, because as I've previously mentioned, not all chapters are enough developed. So now that the template is ready and we know what to do, we can find partners who really want to contribute and agree to this sort of educational practice and contribute their cases, and this way record their long years of diagnostic experience and set it available for younger colleagues and medical students. This is the poster of our project and today's event and tomorrow. And to finish, here are some words by famous personalities having to do with experiential learning. I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, I do and I understand, about 100 prior to Aristotle. Tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, involve me in the learning process, let me make decisions, let me decide, show me real life and I will learn. And from a more formal way, there is an intimate and necessary relation between the process of actual experience and education. All this, we hope, will bring a promising smile on students' and residents' face. So that was the initial presentation. Thank you.
My subject is uterine pathology. Just now. How do I go forward?
Right.
This.
Yes.
Okay. And to be more precise, uterine corpus pathology. This is a chapter you will find in the HIPON e-learning platform by clicking on Module B for systemic pathology, Unit J for female reproductive system, and Chapter 1 for uterus. And the objective of the chapter is to acquire basic knowledge on the most usually encountered uterine pathology. The chapter comprises a short overview on the principles in the pathology, and there is a text with some information on the normal histology and function of the endometrium. And then there are some small summaries on normal and pathological conditions that one can encounter in the endometrium or the myometrium. And these summaries drive you to two different links. The first link, which is under the summaries concerning endometrial pathology, which is entitled Diagnosing Endometrial Curettage Material, and by clicking on the link, you go there. And then there's a second link at the end of the overview, after the small summaries on endometrial stromal tumors and smooth muscle tumors, and the link is entitled Uterine Mesenchymal Tumors, and you can find it here. Moreover, there are virtual slides, as Professor Lazar said. These are one of the best parts of the chapter. You can play with them, go around them, have them on high magnification, on low magnification. And I've decided to use three different slides. The first one is an endometrium of the late secretory phase, and I've chosen it because it is the reason of many overdiagnosis by pathologists due to the often existing artificial crowding. I've seen cases of menstrual endometrium even being diagnosed as endometrial carcinomas, so I think this would be a useful slide. The second virtual slide is a typical atypical polypoid adenomyoma with a distorted glans, the morules, and the smooth muscle stroma. And there are many comments in the summary of the overview on those lesions. And then the first virtual slide that I've chosen for this chapter is a case of serous endometrial cancer. And I've chosen it not because of the papillary formations, because we know by now that papillae are not characteristic of serous carcinomas. We can find papillae in endometrioid carcinomas, but because of the desk formation of these free-floating cells that you can find around the papilla, and there are a lot of them in this specific slide. And finally, there are two case studies in the chapter. I've chosen both case studies to be mixed endometrial carcinomas. The first one is a mixed endometrial intraepithelial carcinoma, which is the precursor of serous carcinoma, together with an intramucosal endometrioid carcinoma, both of them in a regressed cystic polyp. And I would like to thank Olga Riccioni for her help. She helped me a lot for those cases. And the second case study, again, a mixed carcinoma, an endometrioid, together with a clear cell endometrial carcinoma. Since Professor Lazarus went a lot through the way we function with case studies, I thought it would be interesting to make the presentation of one of the links, just to show you that by using the HIPON method, you can go through images and learn through images, even with what might look like a tutorial. And I've chosen the first link with the title Diagnosing Endometrial Curettage Material. I think it's heavy, and I think it's difficult. And it's difficult mostly because the tissue is fragmented and disoriented, and because of that you have a lot of different diagnoses, and what a pathologist, a teacher can do is just use text and histological pictures in order to analyze mostly a thinking process, not to say this is this and this is that. And throughout the whole tutorial, I focus on important rules, which are that one should go throughout the slides on low power, don't start on high power pictures. Beware of many artifacts that one can encounter in curettage material. Acquire knowledge on the normal endometrium, and finally search for secondary diagnostic.
Thank you indeed. I think it's an excellent timing for having the HIPON platform now ongoing, because there are basically two major things happening in this field. One is that we are changing medicine radically. We are going into precision medicine. We know for many more diseases and subset of diseases the molecular backgrounds that happens in the cells and therefore in the tissues. And so we have to have a very good understanding of what happens in cells and tissues, and we have to use the tools to see the changed molecules in the cells and the tissues. And that requires a lot of learning from people doing that. And I mean by people doing that, the whole group of biomedical scientists, but also all doctors have to have way more understanding of basic pathology and applied pathology. So that's a huge change with respect to medicine in general. So we call it precision medicine, so bringing the right drug to the right person. And for teaching, actually, it's the same. We see a huge change towards student-oriented learning rather than teacher-oriented teaching. And I think that major change also is happening at the moment. And I am experienced both things now because we do a lot of work on precision medicine, but also more than a month ago our new curriculum started, which is a completely different curriculum compared to the previous one. So the whole curriculum is at will of students what they like to choose. There is no obligation except for regular examination. So it's a totally different way of teaching and learning. And I think the HIPON platform that we use now for basic pathology a lot is helping us to reach the goals that we now have. So let's think first of why we have pathology education. Some of you may be involved in problem-based learning, in which pathology education was integrated or blended into solving problems for patients. And I think that was a phase in understanding how we should teach that made us realize that we really need pathology teaching beforehand. And I think to understand disease, you have to understand more pathology than we used to. And it's more and more the foundation of modern medicine. So the set of symptoms or the syndromes, they are disappearing, and we are moving towards altered molecule cells and tissues. So as I said, the foundation of precision medicine. Now this also is our work as routine pathologists in the daily practice. That's what we do. We try to translate the findings, the knowledge from basic pathology into an individual diagnosis. An individual diagnosis that's correct for a patient and based on which the patient can be treated. And so it's really a medical discipline, and it's becoming more and more a medical discipline. We see disappearance of the borders between pathology and imaging, between pathology and genetics, between pathology and microbiology. They used to be very different specialists, and now we see they are working together. In my opinion, we are moving to diagnosticians rather than pathologists only doing histopathology. So it's a medical discipline. We are part of the medical team that diagnoses patients. And diagnostics is becoming more important, and it's very clear now that the most important determination of the fate of a patient is the correct diagnosis. It's maybe even more important than the correct treatment. So the correct diagnosis is very, very critical. And furthermore, I think because this is growing and this is important, it's very critical that we have the young talent coming to pathology early on. And I'm very happy now that we have every day in our laboratory, we have first year medical students looking at slides together with pathologists. And in our training, we give now the same amount of teaching to pathology as we do for internal medicine and for surgery. And I think that shows the way pathology is now evolving. So the question then is, who should teach pathology? And who should teach general pathology? We see in many curricula now throughout the world that a lot of pathology is being taught by internal medicine people or by nephrologists or even by surgeons. And a lot of teaching also is done by basic scientists. Now they are of course people who have a lot of knowledge of pathology, but I think one of the reasons is that, and we have experienced the same, is that it's difficult to get the clinical pathologists away from the microscopes, they are very busy, to go back and to teach the basic pathology. And I think that's not a good approach, that's not a good way to do it, and I hope that using the HIPON platform we are going to have our clinical pathologists more involved also in basic pathology teaching. Because I think the changes that we see now in pathology, in knowledge, in medicine, are so important that my statement that you cannot be a good clinical pathologist if you have no understanding of basic pathology is more and more apt. And it's sometimes even difficult to convince the residents or trainees, the young pathologists, that it's important because they like to recognize an image and know what it is. But I think it's very important that you understand what's happening in the tissue and not only try to match it to a picture in an atlas. So clinical pathology, that we see more and more done by clinical pathologists. But what we also see in quite a few curricula where there is no large part of clinical pathology teaching, actually you see that sometimes clinicians do a little bit, or actually sometimes nobody does it. So especially in the clinical phase, there are curricula where there is no part for pathology. So they see pathology only in the autopsy room or at the multidisciplinary team meetings. And so in several curricula we see now that medical students, when they're in the clinical phase, they go to medicine, they go to surgery, but they don't go to pathology. And I think that's very wrong, because I think you need to have them in the laboratory also in that phase. So that teaching is important and needs enthusiasm of clinical pathologists. And again, having an instrument like the HIPON platform is very helpful because the students actually like to use it a lot. So how do we do that? We used to have, and I had that also when I had my school, you had your organs that were shown and you looked at the organs in the museum. We still do that, actually students like it, but looking just at the microscopy is not helpful. So if you have an organ, you like to also see the microscope, but actually also you like to see the whole patient there. So bringing these things together is very important. Most of what we see now in many curricula is that it's done case-based. And I think case-based is helpful, but if you only have case-based approaches, you are losing the overview. And that's why I think that the general pathology can use cases as illustration, but the basic processes have to be explained. Many of you may have had a microscope in your first year or second year of medical school, and you brought it to your school, or the school had a microscope. And I realized already quickly when I started teaching that if you have, let's say, 20 hours of teaching microscopy, then you lose 25% of it by telling and explaining how to use a microscope. And I also learned that many of the students never master it, they don't take the time. So looking through microscope is very ineffective, the classical microscope. And using the digital images is, on the one hand, way more effective, you have more time of them. But on the other hand, it's very helpful for students because they master it, they find it very easy to navigate. And now they start looking at the image rather than struggling with an instrument. I come to back that later. And an important part of what pathology nowadays is experimental pathology. So use the experiments you do in your lab and integrate that with the daily practice. So the clinical pathology part, again, and we saw example just now for the gynecopathology, it's very important that you know where the problems are, where the, and there, after you have shown the processes, you really go into the cases, which the difficult areas in it. Again, here, if you do that with your trainees, you can do that at the microscope. You can have 20-headed microscope, but if you want to have them learning themselves, take it in their own hand, you would like to have it available all the time and everywhere. And what's becoming, of course, clear and clear, if you teach, for instance, dermatopathology, you cannot teach dermatopathology without the dermatologist or the images of the dermatologist. So we do a lot of teaching multidisciplinary. So together with the clinician and the pathologist, you go into your teaching. Now, if we look at the different curricula that we have now in the United States and in Europe, you see there are traditional curricula still there, where you start the first year with the normal anatomy and the normal physiology. The second year you go into pathology, etc. And often there was a block or a period or a series of lectures pathologists were giving. This is still in some curricula the situation. There were microscopes and slides, and that was being used. There have been a movement since, I think, the 80s or so, the 80s and 90s of the previous centuries, to move from the traditional curricula to the problem-based curricula. Now, problem-based curricula, there are two flavors. There are the problem-based curricula where the student recognizes the problems and tries to solve it, with the teacher as more of a guide rather than somebody who explains. And there are the problem-based curricula where the teacher defines the problems, and then the students go along what the teacher does. And there is a lot of discussion still ongoing what is the best option. We always had in our facility the problem-based learning, but the teacher defined the problems, not the students. And I think we were very happy with that, so we still could have a good overview of what was being taught. What we see now the last 5 years or so, that we move to a new form of curricula, which are the patient-based curricula. So the patient is the central person, not the disease, but the patient. And I think it's a major difference, because as you know, patients never have only one disease. They have always a process what's ongoing. And if you have patient-oriented curricula, then you are moving towards way more case-oriented approaches. And you see clinicians can be therefore very much in the lead. I think that's an opportunity and a risk at the moment. Now, clinical pathology was being taught in some of the traditional curricula. Nothing. There was nothing there. There was no internship of pathology. Sometimes the autopsy room, sometimes internships as a choice of a student, so not as a general part. Now, in the problem-based curricula, pathologists sort of became invisible, or they became teachers rather than clinicians. So you were losing your interaction with the students, and I think actually it's a major reason why in some countries it's difficult to get young people into pathology. What we see now in the more patient-based curricula, pathologists become way more in the front of what's happening, because what students do, if, for instance, discussing a patient where a biopsy is taken, they go into the pathology laboratory, see how the biopsy is processed, they look at the slides themselves to see what's happening around the patient, and they are participating in the multidisciplinary team meetings. So I think that's sort of the background. Now the methods of teaching and students have really changed. The way students learn is very different. They don't learn from 9 to 5 during the day. They learn sometimes on Saturday morning, and sometimes on Thursday evening, and they choose what they learn themselves. They have a different attention span to certain types of things. very few students can listen intensively for more than 20 minutes to a teacher, unless it's an exceptional teacher, and we have few of those. So that sounds negative, but it's also very positive, because students are also very well equipped to find their own way of getting the right knowledge. And so I think that's very important. Now, pathologists also have changed, but not all of them. I still see pathologists giving lectures, like myself, and not understanding that the way we should approach our students should be different. And that students already, before they come to your lecture, very often have seen your slides of the previous years. They have already made the questions you asked the previous year in your exam. They have already done that. They have already rated, seen the ratings you have. Just a question, who of you is teaching pathology in a curriculum? And did you look at the internet how your students rate your lecture after your lecture? Because there are a lot of platforms, and I think everywhere, so after each lecture students rate you. So you can see what you did well and what you did wrong. And also, I have asked this question many times, and very few teachers do that. And I think it's a very valuable source, because you immediately see what your students think about you. Often these are not so easy to find, so if you put in your own name, you don't find them. So ask your students, where are you rating me? And they will tell you, and you can find it. Just do it, because it's done more than you think. The other thing is, if you are going to teach something, a lot of students will go to the internet and look at the topic, and they see excellent movies, they see excellent teachers, and so you have to know that that's happening. And of course, when we will have HIPON, they will go to that, I'm sure. Just some points at the digital microscope. There are a few laboratories that only have digital microscope nowadays, not many. I think I still have to work for another 6 to 7 years, and I think I will be able to use my microscope until I retire. I'm not sure, because we see a major change now. Because there are a lot of advantages, and we use a lot of digital pathology for teaching already for more than 10 years, because it's way more effective than classical microscope. Because indeed, as I said, looking through a microscope is not an easy skill, and looking to a screen is an easy skill. So it's a major change. It's much cheaper. You don't have to invest in microscopes anymore. Scanners are very cheap nowadays. Everybody has a computer screen, so it's much cheaper than using microscope. You don't have the lack of tissue anymore, because as you know, if you give slides to students every year, they break about 10% or so, and you have to replace them, and you have to find new blocks. When you have and especially when you look at very difficult cases or very small amount of neoplastic cells in a sample, in digital images you can multiply it as often as you can. The very important thing is not bound to time and place. I have already seen students in the train studying pathology on their screen, because in a train you have also the internet available. So they do it in the evening, they do it early in the morning, all the time that they like to do it. So I think that's a major change of how students work, and it's very helpful. It can be very interactive, so we still have classroom approaches where there is one teacher and the students work at the same time all together at the slides, and they can ask questions, so you can put up the question of the student on a screen, they can point to a cell and everybody can see, and you can ask the student, what do you think about it? You can give guidance, so it's way more interactive than the microscope, because everybody is looking at a different place. And you can enrich it, of course. You can put arrows in it that they can disappear and can go. You can put links in it. So it's a very big advantage of the digital microscope. And you see, and tomorrow I can show you some examples how we have used that in teaching basic pathology. Just a few words on our new curriculum. As I said, I have now 2 months of experience almost, and it's very different. So provide a program, and we have to see how it's going to work. So we provide programs, and students can choose to go or not go. So they have to sign up. So every day we can have maximum, for instance, from 4 to 5, we can have maximum 10 students that come to our lab to look at slides. And the more students come, the more money the department will get for teaching. So the incentive is to make it very attractive for students. And so the student really decides what he or she, mostly a she of course nowadays, is going to learn in a year or so. There are a lot of opportunities. They can go to the laboratory, they can go to the clinic, they can go to textbooks in the library, they can go to films. We created quite a few films they can watch. Films should not be longer than 4 to 5 minutes, but you can make several of those. We created also opportunities in the museum where they can use the organs and work with them. So there's a lot of different things, and they can choose what they like. But the key thing, of course, is then evaluation. So every 3 months they will get an exam, and you will see, and they can see what their progress is. And basically it's based on 2 lines. So it's the line mechanisms of disease, which is very good for pathology, of course, and actually I am the director of the mechanisms of disease line throughout the curriculum. And the other line is clinical practice, and also in clinical practice pathology is coming more and more, so we have a major part. So I think that we have to understand the changes that are happening in medicine. We have to understand the changes that are happening within students, and I think that HIPON actually is a very, very good tool to provide a lot of what our students nowadays use. Just some examples. I said the virtual microscope, students use it all the time, very often. The case of the day, so they can have every day one of the pathologists selects a case and students can look at it either at home or in the department. They look at the movies, we have internships. The residents play a major part because students like role models, and our residents who are not much older than our students are excellent role models, so they like to do them. And so there are multiple ways of teaching. A few final remarks. We do need to adapt to the new environment. It's very important. I think without a virtual microscope we cannot reach the goals that we have. There is a lot available in HIPON, but also other sources. Go to them. But in the end, I'm very convinced that teachers remain the key. They are the persons that students look to, regardless of what the internet brings. They want to have the guidance, and I think being a good teacher remains the key for excellent education. Thank you very much.
What the model noted, and the staff members noted also, that the group became over time more homogeneous, which is also logical because those which were less experienced gathered some experience, some skills and knowledge about the topic, and they came closer together with those which were more experienced. Of course, something which is more socially determined, but is also a very good element which was noted by the model and which would otherwise be maybe missed, is the low transferability, so that people from smaller hospitals, because the topic was really relatively specific, and that people from smaller hospitals realized that they will not have the possibility to use this knowledge, and that most likely no one in their surrounding will be interested in hearing what they have learned in this course. So it's a very, very complex assessment and gives to a interested staff and especially management very valuable information about the whole structure of the learning process, and not only about the, we can say, first line interest, what the student has learned, what competencies the student has acquired. What we have learned, that the model is very robust and that it can be adapted also for postgraduate teaching, and what is important, that the system gets a very strong feedback which can be used in order to organize better the learning process. What we intend to do, and we hope also to involve others in this, the European Society showed some interest, and we hope also that our university will be more interested in this, to try and to exploit this platform in other types of courses, and of course, if it's possible, to adapt it for the curriculum as a whole. It's not easy. It's a very, very comprehensive task, but eventually it should pay, because the information gathered through this can be very valuable in the assessment, and then, of course, in the further planning of the curriculum in different levels of teaching. So, thank you very much. That's